We got some news to go through today. Obviously, there was the Iranian response to the U.S. strikes. I streamed when I found out the strike happened over the weekend. For anybody who missed that, the United States struck Iranian atomic facilities working on both a civilian nuclear program, but presumably on the higher enrichment levels up to 60 and past 60%, which could be on the pathway towards enrichment that could be used for an atomic bomb. And they were getting closer than where they were before. How close they were and whether there was an imminent threat, there had been no evidence publicly provided by the Trump administration to prove that. But the Trump administration went forward with a strike anyway. Whether or not there was evidence for that was not provided to the public outside of the president's word and the word of the Israeli government, which would want to use this moment of Iranian weakness to strike no matter what, whether they were 3 weeks away, 3 months away, or quite frankly, 3 years away. That doesn't change the fact that the Iranians were at least up to 60% enrichment, which far exceeds what the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty says a country can enrich their material up to. So that doesn't change that fact. But whether or not we were close to them attaining the atomic weapon, and whether or not this constitutionally, these types of war-making actions, whether or not people try to wrap their hands in pillows and say, oh no, bombing another country, that's not war, sir. That's a precision strike, sir. That's not an act of war. That is merely an act of physical force of deadly potential. Get the fuck out of here with these word games, okay? There might be a question about whether there'll be a ground war between the United States and Iran and and Israel and Iran, which is extremely unlikely to what I would say damn near impossible, both due to the separation between Iran and Israel. No country, especially not Iraq, wanting to host an American invasion. The mountainous terrain of Iran, their population of 92 million, that will certainly, many will likely take up arms against an American attack. Whether or not anybody tells you that if we were to cross the border, the regime would fall in popular format. But if we bomb a country, are we saying that the AUMF is so broad, the authorization for use of military force after 9/11, after Iraq, is so expansive that bombing any country, for particularly any reason, is legal? I mean, the AUMF had to do with terrorism. What does that have to do with stopping a nation state from attaining an atomic weapon? Oh, well, the Iranian mullahs fund different organizations like Hezbollah, which the United States designates as... No. The atomic weapons program and fighting terrorism, these are two separate things. You can try to connect them how many ever ways you want, but connecting 9/11 to bombing an atomic weapons program in Iran is impossible. And therefore, these strikes are unconstitutional. And so there's not only a question of, how close we were, the communication with Congress, whether or not all of the Gang of Eight or just the Republican members were informed of the strikes beforehand, but also just the basic constitutionality of the act. Anyway, it happened anyway, okay? No Nobel Peace Prizes being awarded in Washington anytime soon. It hit very hard, and now the Iranians have responded. And they've responded with force, and I wanted to check the segment out with you guys right now because these strikes have happened within the last couple of hours, and so a lot of the information is still coming in. But honestly, throughout all of the options that were at Iran's disposal, these are not the most devastating attacks that they could have probably rolled out. That's not to say that Iran has some secret trap card up their sleeve that they have yet to pull out, but that is to say that they have other actors who are working upon their behalf throughout the Middle East, particularly in the country of Iraq, that have weapons that are within range of American bases, that have American soldiers that are made of flesh and bone, and exploding parts tend to tear that up. And if the Iranians were to get their proxies, now these proxies of course have their own interests, so it's not like, yes, Master Iran, and they bow and do whatever they say. But if they want to continue to get finances if they want to continue to get weapons, if they want to continue to get support from the Iranians in the IRGC, they're going to want to act with an interest that keeps the IRGC, keeps the regime of the Ayatollah alive. And so my biggest concern, as I had talked about on the initial stream over the weekend, once the strike occurred, as I talked about before the strike, as I talked about immediately after the strike updates with some people who called in, I have always, and as I replied to Brianna Wu, who, has been making the most interesting posts on social media lately. I'd love to talk to her about it, but we invited her on the program, but she's a busy woman. I was always fearful of our bases in Iraq getting targeted by not just the Iranian longer range missiles and drones, which the Iranians do have a record of informing us beforehand, but by use of proxy as a separation between the Iranians and the Americans that can stop some of the blowback being thrown at them and possibly being thrown at the proxy. And with that, that barrier of removal, they might feel a little bit more loose when it comes to causing fatalities and therefore the death of American soldiers. That was my big fear. Now, so far, my fear of something kicking off, particularly in Iraq, that has not come to pass. The big movement that has occurred, despite all the talk about a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which could impact international energy prices, bring up oil prices, which would be a particular soft point for Trump, who campaigned on lowering energy prices, who continues to say, keep the oil prices down. I don't know if you guys saw over the last 24 hours, but Trump made a post where he essentially just demands that the oil prices go down. I wonder if I can, I don't think I have it in my replies, but it essentially had the same vibe as Vladimir Stop. It was oil price go down. Everybody worked to keep the oil prices down. So that response the Iranians have not taken. The attack in Iraq, the Iranians have not taken. What they decided to go for was America's largest military base in the region, which is the base in Qatar. And let me tell you, that base is heavily protected. Out of all of American bases in the Middle East, being our largest base in the region, being one of our most important bases in the region, it also has some of the toughest security in the region. And so there was some forewarning, as is being reported right now, that they had some foreknowledge of this attack, possibly given by the Iranian government. And after that forewarning was given, American military resources were scrambled, and they were able to get jets out before the strikes occurred. And we know about 2 strikes as of right now. Let's play you guys the CNN update from Casey Hunt.
Retaliates. I'm Casey Hunt. Welcome to the arena. An American airbase in Qatar coming under fire from medium and short-range ballistic missiles. Iran's supreme leader posting just moments ago, his nation, quote, will not surrender to anyone's violation. This video, released by Iran, reportedly shows the moment one of those missiles was launched. Iranian state media calling this operation, quote, blessings of victory. In a new post on his Truth Social platform, President Trump said that no Americans were harmed and that damage was minimal. He also confirmed that Iran gave advance warning that an attack was coming. The president adding that.
Now that is likely true, and I do believe it to be true, but I do wonder how advanced that warning was. Whether it was 30 minutes, an hour, I have no clue. The specifics on that have not been given, but it certainly was enough time, according to the administration, for them to scramble resources into a more defensive posture.
That Iran had, quote, gotten it all out of their system, end quote. Al Udeid Air Base is America's largest installation in the Middle East. It's home to about 10,000 service members, and it's also the regional headquarters for U.S. Central Command. People at a shopping mall there in Doha running for safety upon hearing that Iranian missiles were headed toward their country. And this footage showing debris landing by the side of the road. It's unknown whether this is from an Iranian missile or a defensive interceptor. All of this coming less than 48 hours after American bombers and submarines struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites. A senior White House official says this retaliation was expected and that at this time, President Trump does not want more military engagement in the region. CNN across all angles of this story from around the world. Let's start at the White House with CNN Chief National Affairs Correspondent Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, of course, the question here, does it end with what we saw right now? Clearly, the president seems to be trying to send some signals that that could be a possibility. What are you hearing?
Okay, so here is the benefits in favor of ending this now for each side and the negatives. I'm just going to list them quickly. For the Israelis, if they were to end this right now, that would probably save the Israeli public from continued long-range bombing, which is the one country for sure, no matter which direction this goes, that the Iranians are going to continue to trade with, because they've continued to trade with Israel for the entirety of this, conflict, whatever you want to call it. So that would be a benefit for them, because they have had some Iranian missiles punch through their air defense systems. There are multiple layers to hit Israeli military installations, to punch civilian infrastructure, and even to hit hospitals, which, of course, for any country is going to be quite traumatic. And so that is a benefit for the Israelis. The Israeli public have become largely weary of war after over 600 days of war and fighting in Gaza and fighting with Hezbollah. The bombing campaign in Syria really didn't get much blowback for them, just really explosives for the Syrians, as they had to kind of just take it due to the state of their armed forces at the moment, and the Israelis took advantage of that. And now the exchanges with, of course, Iran. And so that would be a benefit. But I would say that from the Israeli perspective, even if you were to just assume the Iranian nuclear program has been set back multiple years, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, whatever you want to imagine, you can say 10 years, that doesn't mean that Iran's threat to Israel has necessarily stopped. It's underpinning, IRGC organization that underpins the country's security, is staffed by people who are radically anti-Israel. The government is radically anti-Israel, against their interests in the region. They've been positioning military resources for decades against Israel for the last 2 decades. I mean, through the funding of organizations like Hezbollah, through the smuggling of weapons to even Sunni groups like Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And so Israel, seeing Iran in this moment of weakness, even if their people are worry, even if it could continue to have blowback, a government like Bibi Netanyahu, if there was enough strategic gain, there could be some benefit into continuing to kick this down the road. Not to mention, while there is a political aspect to this that has been often talked in like commentator circles online for Benjamin Netanyahu and the benefits of continuing the war, there could be some benefit from continuing this on, because it continues to delay the question of an election, another 100 days, another 200 days. But also, what better off-ramp from the conflict than we have just bombed Iran's top nuclear facilities with the backing of the United States and bombed them relentlessly. If there was an off-ramp to be had, there is an off-ramp there. So there is some potential political benefit. There is some military benefit to continue to bomb the Iranians if they wanted to pursue some sort of regime change, hoping that the government could change to a government that is more accepting towards Israeli interests in the region. But the likelihood of that is quite low. And so continuing to hold out for that, to think that your bombing campaign is going to bring some revolution on the ground, because I am under no belief that either the American government or the Israeli government are going to want to put troops on the ground. I think that, honestly, there seems to be a pretty good motivation for the Israelis to, cut their losses now. They've come out on the other side of this looking pretty good. And, even if they were to cut their losses now, would that mean they would stop their operations in Gaza? Probably not. And so would this mean an immediate end to war for the Israeli people? Probably not. But it would probably mean the potential of more Iranian missiles punching through their air defense systems and striking another hospital, or striking more military installations, or striking whatever goes down. And so I think that the Israelis could have a reason to continue. But I think there are multiple other indicators or other reasons, at least, as they would use this off ramp, and with the Israeli government being what it is at the moment, continue the war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Uh, for the United States, I mean, there's every benefit in the world to jump off right now. Oh my gosh, I couldn't think of a better situation if Donald Trump was to reel back, punch Iran in the nose. Uh, I mean, 30,000-pound bombs in Fordow. The other Esfahan and the other nuclear site hit by 30 Tomahawk missiles. Doing this 36-hour flight path with diversionary flights to confuse the Iranians, and pulling it off with seemingly no American assets destroyed, despite what the Iranians or whatever outlet or random social media account you saw said. No American lives lost, no American assets lost, presumably, as from what we can see, besides the bombs that exploded, which seemed to explode right on position. Trump said bullseye, and of course you can't ever really take Trump at his word, but the satellite photographs and other photographs that have come out seem to indicate, and even reports from Iranian media seem to indicate, that it did quite a lot of damage. Now, some Iranian media outlets are saying, oh, just the entrances were blown up. But it doesn't look like that for me. I can't tell you that 100% of the facility was destroyed and no material was recoverable, no research was recoverable or whatever, because it's probably not true. The Iranians being able to get the scientists out before, the scientists that are still alive and weren't killed in earlier Israeli strikes, and some of the material out before is easy to believe. And that's what the Iranians said happened. But losing these losing the infrastructure, losing the facilities, that's not something you can just quickly pop back into existence, especially when we could talk about Fordow, when we talk about something that was born into the earth, born into a mountainside, specifically to avoid a bombing operation, which is just, come to their doorstep. And so it is not hard to believe that this has really set back the Iranian nuclear program. It didn't come with any American losses that can be foreseen in public. And if they were to end here, even with these missile strikes on American bases, I think that would make sense. And in fact, if you look to how Donald Trump is talking, he seems to be of that opinion. Well, it depends on which day of the week it is, but we'll talk about that in a second. Here is what Trump said in response to these strikes specifically. Iran has officially responded to our obliteration, using diplomatic language as always, obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected and have very effectively countered. There have been 14 missiles fired, 13 were knocked down, and 1 was set free because it was headed in a non-threatening direction. I am pleased to report that no Americans were harmed and hardly any damage was done. Most importantly, they've gotten it out of their system, and there will hopefully be no further hate. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice. Saying that publicly is basically him saying, look, they didn't want to hurt us, or at least that's what he's signaling, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. So Donald Trump seems to see this as the perfect off-ramp. Hey, we hit them hard. Hey, they were able to fire some rockets at us. Nobody got hurt. Nothing really got damaged. We didn't really take any damage. There's no real motivating factor making the United States think, oh my God, we need to strike. We need to respond. We need to go into Iran and blow up all their bridges. We need to go into Iran and take out their electricity infrastructure. We need to go into Iran and we need to kill the mullah, right? And this is, to be very, very direct with you guys, a 180 turn from some of the talk we were seeing within the 24 hours preceding this. Because within 24 hours before this, not even 24 hours, Donald Trump said, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MEGA representing, presumably, make Iran great again. Make Iran great again. Now, whether he thinks Iran was great again uh, during one of its times of, broader empire, or if he means the Shah, if he just, is being funny. It doesn't really matter. What does matter here is that Donald Trump was floating the idea of being open to regime change in Iran, essentially signaling to the Iranians, but also to the public, that there could be more to come, that it might not just stop with precision strikes. Next might come a much larger air campaign intending to overturn the regime by targeting infrastructure, governmental places, police officers. It could be anything. A ground invasion, as some people suggested, was the next step, which I always thought was quite ridiculous because, if anything about Iran's geography, anything about, that they have a lot of young men in their society. It's a generally young society of 92 million people. The Israelis are not going to be able to be the ones doing the lion's share of the ground combat there. Who's going to be doing that? It's going to be American soldiers going up Iranian mountain after mountain after mountain. Go ask the Iraqis how that went for them. Point is, there's a big disincentive for an American invasion of Iran. That's not to say it could never work. That's not to say that it could not be successful, but that's to say that there's a high possibility, if it's not done fast and quick, and the IRGC kind of crumbles beneath a type of, I don't know, fast and furious attack, then we could have a real slog. That's not even to talk about the holdovers of occupation. A bunch of motivations to make the only way to guarantee regime change, which is to put troops on the ground, a very, very, very unenviable position for the American government, especially considering Donald Trump has signaled so much about being the peace president, not the president of forever war, and there would be no bigger symbol of forever war than a giddy John Bolton on TV clapping his hands together about the idea of invading into Iran and toppling the regime. Irrespective of how he wanted to handle Afghanistan, drop the Constitution, get out of there, that symbol to the American public, they're going to see that and they're going to think, that it's forever war. And Trump campaigned on that hard, and we've seen a decent section of his base buck up hard. And we know that a majority of the American public don't really think that bombing Iran is really a great idea. Now, whether or not every single American has balanced the security benefit and negatives of disabling the Iranian nuclear program, that doesn't really matter. I mean, I think it matters to whether or not, the American public is particularly informed on these issues. But when it comes to how they're perceiving it, you try to inform the American public on foreign policy overnight, good luck. That's something that's going to take a lot of effort through a broader messaging campaign than this quick turnaround than the Trump administration had on this after months and years of being the peace candidate, the peace bringer, the art of the deal guy, the great negotiator, quote unquote. Now, people who followed Trump's first term in office and knows about his drone campaign, knows about the restriction of access to data on the drone campaign, maybe they're not going to believe him as much. Maybe those who remember what he said on the 2015 campaign trail about going after the families, maybe they're not going to think, okay, that's a man of peace. That's the peace bringer. Maybe those who remember Jared Kushner's proposal for a two-state solution, quote unquote, to the Palestinians and Israelis might think, oh, maybe that great negotiating skill is not as skillful as those who are his biggest supporters would say. But the American public were of the belief that he was the peace candidate. A decent section of his base was of the belief that he's the peace candidate. And so having to go and do this is already something that's put a lot of downward pressure on that image of him. It's put a lot of downward pressure even within certain sections of his own movement. As we've seen the clashes from Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz go out in the public as they spat over this, as we've seen Steve Bannon go at it, as we've seen others in the Republican Party go at it, and of course those in the base and the alt commentary internet sphere, and all of them start to disapprove publicly. Now, look, none of them have really broken with Trump to the point of I will not support the man. I'm against the man. We all saw Tucker Carlson bend the knee a little bit, and Donald Trump even says he kissed the ring in private. But we saw Thomas Massie, somebody who has always been kind of principled on this stuff. Go out there and say, I'm not in favor of this. I want to have I want to have congressional review of these types of actions. Broken clock, right, twice a day. But at the end of the day, if this is the perspective of the American public right now, you think they're going to be on board for a full ground war from the peace president? No. Okay. Ask, if Nixon, by the end of his time in office, was saying we're going to go to a Vietnam War II, Electric Boogaloo. Hell, even the expansion of the war that he did do to try to give himself maneuverability to go this way or that way on the way out. I mean, even that was decried, let alone an expansion of the size that would be necessary to guarantee regime change. So what I think Trump is doing, since I think regime change war on the ground is unlikely, is basically telling the Iranians it doesn't have to end here. If you don't want to come and bring about terms that would be beneficial for us, or if you don't want to consider limiting American losses when retaliating to save face, which is what the American government seemingly will allow, then maybe we'll go a little bit further. Whether or not there's any bite to that bark, that has yet to be seen. Hopefully it will never be seen. But I do think that is the case. And watching a bunch of alt media commentators online try to, do the mental gymnastics that is necessary to go from the peace candidate to the regime change in Iran candidate has been quite honestly amusing. Quite amusing. So that's the United States. That's Israel. That's their benefit and negatives for jumping off. I really don't think there's much any American benefit from this unless they really think that the Iranian government is so close to toppling that all they would need to do is a few bombs dropped here and there and signal to the Iranian people that the regime can collapse. But I think that's delusional. I think the IRGC still has control on the ground, and I don't see any public widespread protests that could indicate the regime is anywhere close to that. And I also do not know if an American assisted air campaign, as some people are confidently asserting, would help those people, or if it would hurt those people to portray them as a sort of fifth column from within the nation that is weakening Iran in its moment of resistance against those who would occupy her, those who would subjugate her, those who would take advantage of her and, abuse her or whatever. You get the idea. From Iran's enemies. Either way, I think the lion's share of the benefit lays towards using this off-road now, especially if the Iranian response stops here and they're not going to have a second wave of attacks in Iraq, which is still not impossible. Because if we move on to the last person who benefits or, loses from this, we have to talk about the Iranians. We have to talk about the Iranians because the Iranians have to take this threat semi-seriously. They have to take this threat of regime change semi-seriously, not only because, the American government could unleash a bigger bombing campaign that could make it harder to live in Iran, and the economic situation is already not fantastic. Not only would the Israeli government probably be willing to assist in that bombing campaign, but also the Iranian government is not in the best military defensive position. During the opening stages of this attack on Iran from the Israelis, not only did their long-range strikes disable a lot of their air defense systems, but also drones and munitions that were placed within the country of Iran beforehand. And much like Operation Spiderweb, when it came time to strike, that's what they did. They struck and they disabled much of Iran's Russian-shipped air defense systems. The long-range air defense systems were probably the area that took some of the biggest shellacking. And I'm talking about the Russian-supplied S-400s. Now, I don't know if you guys peruse the arms market much. If you guys call up your black market dealers and talk about all of the weapons you need to put down your people in some brutalizing, suppression campaign. I don't know the type of people who are, watching right now. But I would imagine that everybody who probably is not seeing a lot of Russian air defense systems entering the arms market right now. The Russians are having a hard enough time covering all of their own airspace. being the largest country on earth, now dealing with a Ukrainian state that's massively expanding drone production. And we're seeing those drone strikes on Iran expand. I mean, on Russia expand. And the energy ceasefire, which Trump put into place, quote unquote, despite the violations that have occurred on it. Once that goes away, what is that going to mean? Once, if Russia decides to make that go away or just deteriorates, whatever, what is that going to mean for Russian oil refineries? What is that going to mean for the Russian economy? And again, they don't just have a little space to cover. The Israelis, when it comes to their air defense systems, Israel is small, which in some, in many ways is a military negative. But in some ways, when it comes to air defense systems, that means you can highly condense the air defense systems that are protecting your territory. You can't do that for Russia. And so they need a ton of air defense systems to cover their country, and it still hasn't been enough. They're not going to be able to supply Iran with replacements. And so those long-range air defense systems that were provided by the Russians are essentially out of commission. And replacements are not coming anytime soon. And considering the words of support that the Russian government has been able to serve up to the Iranians, being basically the furthest extent of what they've been able to serve up, I don't think that they're going to hurt their current war effort in order to supplement Iranian air defense systems to give them a little bit more maneuverability here, despite the strategic partnership they signed just a year ago. Just a year ago. So the Iranians are really getting the short end of the stick here. So the air defense question for the Iranians is quite tough right now. The supply of long-range missiles and drones that the Iranians have been strained not only through use but also by strikes from the Israelis. Probably one of the biggest pains that they felt is not even necessarily the missiles, which of course they've lost those in strikes and they have lost them through use, but also the missile launchers. They've lost a sizable portion of their missile launcher supply. And if they have missiles but no launchers, well, then tough luck. Okay? Bullets without a gun is nothing more than, just something to jangle in your pocket. Kind of hard to do that with the missile, but I guess they're still pretty to look at. You can still march them up and down the street. I guess now on the back of Toyota Hilux if you don't have a carrier. But point is, the Iranians are losing capacity to defend themselves from long-range strikes. Their air defense systems are continuing to be hit, even if the amount of visibly documented air defense strikes outside of those long-range ones have been less numerous, and their launchers have been hit quite hard. Now, the exact amount of destruction, whether or not you're seeing like the Israeli accounts post multiples of the same video, that's probably happening. But it is having an effect. And we're seeing that effect, I think, not only through just the documented evidence of what we've seen get destroyed, but also through the decreasing amounts of Iranian long-range missile and drone strikes as they prepared not only for a long air war potentially with the Israelis, but possibly having to expand that to American bases in the region. Now, it seemed like Trump is trying to avoid that scenario, doesn't want to get American boys in uniform, putting them 6 feet under on his record. But they were still having to prepare for that outcome, and that limited their strikes. And so how long they can go back and forth with the Israelis, despite the fact that the Iranians are claiming they can do this for 2 years, I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. I think that's a lot more bark than bite. I doubt the Iranians would lead by saying, here's the exact amount of time that we could. I think that they couldn't go that long. Now, the Israelis probably could not get through that without more damage, without more stuff getting through. But I don't think it can go that long. And so the Iranians are faced with the question of, do we continue this to strike some more Israeli military installations, strike some more Israeli, maybe civilian infrastructure of some sort, when in return, our civilian infrastructure is going to get hit, our military infrastructure is going to get hit. There's a chance that it could expand to things like bridges and critical infrastructure that will need expansive investment to replace. And with no sanctions relief seemingly down the tube, or at least no guaranteeable sanctions relief, and I only say that because Trump could be quite the fickle negotiator. It's not like they're going to be getting a huge new inflow in cash to do all of these infrastructure repairs. The Iranian economy is already in a rough spot. And that's all on top of the fact that the Iranian government is not in the most popular view with its own people. There are cases of police brutality, cases of corruption, just economic stagnation, a lack of employment opportunities for youth, and the fact that the youth, which are very populous, make up the majority of the country. People in their 20s and under, they make up a majority of the nation, and they tend to have a less positive view of the regime, not only due to the police brutality, but restrictions placed on their daily life, the economic situation, etc. Do they really want to upset that political balance right now with a more protracted, drawn out conflict with the Israelis, when at the end of this, what's going to change? If they continue to go blow to blow with the Israelis, get some bridges bombed, get some more infrastructure bombed, lose more air defense systems, lose more old Tomcats, lose this, lose that, what are they going to be? What's the benefit at the end of this? At the end of this, do they get back their atomic weapons program? Do they get back their facility at Fordow? Do they get back their facility at Isfahan? Do they get back any of their Russian S-400 air defense systems? Do they get back any more of those atomic scientists that they lost? Do they get the chief of staff they lost? Do they get the second chief of staff they lost? Or any of the other high-ranking military officials? What if they lose more? What if they lose more of their high-ranking military staff? What if they lose more air defense systems? What if they lose more missile launchers, which are already going into shorter supply? All while wearing through the leverage they have in the missiles that they still have to fire. What if, the war doesn't just affect them there, but starts to affect the I'm going to say proxies, but you could say allies, militias, whatever term you want to use that benefits you. What if they start to get railed in, not even directly by the Iranians? What if the United States decides, after having less, benefit from striking Iran directly, well, damn, let's try to whittle down their resources in the Middle East. Let's go bomb Kataib Hezbollah. Let's go see what we can do to the Popular Mobilization Forces. Let's list every storehouse that we can think of that they have for munition storage. Let's exhaust all that intelligence networks that we have and blow up everything we have, everything they have. What would they do against that? I mean, I'm not saying the Americans have endless munition supply, but the Iranians have to think about not only what they've lost, but what they can gain and what more they could lose. Hell, Trump was talking openly about assassinating the Ayatollah. Only the second Ayatollah to lead the Islamic Revolution. I mean, that would... what could the Iranian government do in a moment like that? Hell, especially if the Trump administration doesn't hey guys, we're going to kill the Ayatollah tomorrow. Everybody get ready. We're going to kill the Ayatollah. Woohoo. That's not how they're going to do it. What they're going to do is they're going to continue to whittle down their air defense systems. They're especially going to continue to whittle down their missile launchers. They're going to continue to whittle down any drone supply, munition storage, or anything that they can. They're going to do it with the Israelis. It's going to be a coordinated campaign where any response they fire back at Israel, any response they fire back at American bases, are going to be supported in air defense, not by just American assets, not just by Israeli assets, but by Jordanian assets. If they try to attack a base in Qatar, what are the Qataris going to do? They're going to alert American soldiers. They're going to have some forewarning. They're going to use their resources to protect the bases that benefit them. I mean, it's America's most significant military base in the Middle East. You think the Qataris want to lose that? And, I mean, they're going to be competing against quite a lot. They're going to be going uphill against quite a lot. And then, say, 2-3 months down the line, as the American government's starting to feel a little bit antsy because, hey, they expended quite a few munitions against the Houthis, which is probably the one stalwart Iranian ally in the Middle East that's kind of been with them through the whole thing. They can kidnap as many civilian merchant vessels as they want. That's not going to change the dynamic too significantly. It can increase a shipping insurance cost for some amount. They can throw a few more rockets at Israel, but the Israelis have shown themselves sufficient in being able to intercept those. And so after those 3 months, once they've lost more missile launchers, they've lost more leverage, they've lost more air defense systems, they've lost whatever remaining S-300s, S-400s they have. Once those munition stockpiles are not only targeted, but burnt through, as they're going to have to fire back at Israel. They're going to have to fire back at American bases at some point. At that moment, that is when killing the Ayatollah would be its worst. Because at that moment, if the Ayatollah is killed, what can Iran do in response? If they've burnt through their missile supply, if they've burnt through their drone supply, and now they're basically running on a tight diet of drone and missile strikes, their factories are running into overtime to produce whatever they can under sanction to try to get this done. Hell, the Chinese could even divert some resources for whatever reason if they felt like throwing them a bone due to their energy supplier being put on pressure, due to the fact that they do not want to see regime change in Iran, due to the instability it could cause on their border from their energy supplier and from a stalwart American opponent that they can balance against the United States with. Even if they do that, they're still not going to be able to produce them rapidly enough to produce a response at that point that would be sizable enough to likely, make the Iranian people feel like their president had not just been openly assassinated with little to no response. And at that moment, then you'd have to question the viability of the regime. Then you'd have to question whether the IRGC could really keep law down on the streets. Then you'd have to question whether or not the fact that the IRGC has informants on every street corner and in many apartment blocks throughout the whole country, if that's going to be enough to make the Iranian people look on TV, see the Ayatollah dead, and then watch their response Judgment Day red flag missile from hell in the heavenly attack mission XYZ Zim attack missile launched at Israel, whatever funky name they want to give it, the heavenly strike of a la Electric Boogaloo. And then that missile flies over, gets intercepted by the Israelis, and like some apartment block blows up on TV. Whether that's going to be enough to make them think, look, we just responded with force. Look, our government is strong. Or if that's going to project weakness. Is that going to make the Iranians look weak, or is that going to make the Iranians look strong? I think it'll make them look weak. They're going to make Iran. I think it's going to make Iran look weak. And so what options does that put at Iran's disposal at that point? At that point, what options would be at their disposal? Trying to get militias throughout the Middle East, like Kataib Hezbollah, to participate on big, bodacious attacks on American military installations, like those in Iraq, short-range missile strikes that kill American soldiers and could further escalate. I mean, how do you escalate past assassinating the president of a foreign country? I know it's kind of hard to imagine, but once American bodies start hitting the ground, Trump is not a man of compromise. And even if it would mean more American bodies getting on the ground in retaliatory attacks on places across the Middle East, or hell, even attacks on American embassies, it's not like the Iranians have particularly held back from supporting actors who have less than 100% ethical attack list history. But at the end of all of that, Iran, I think, is going to be, despite the deaths of American soldiers, is going to be in a much weaker position domestically, regionally, and I mean, just generally speaking, economically and militarily, than if it was to cut its losses and jump ship now. And I think that leaves a lot of motivation for the Iranians to take a good long look at Trump's proposal that he's put out, which we are going to read right now. Oh, and by the way, if you're curious to what the Europeans think of this, here is a statement from the German Chancellor, from the CDU, Angela Merkel's party, which has had quite a transformation over the last 5 years. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz earlier today: there is no reason to criticize what America did at the weekend. Yes, it is not without risk, but leaving things as they were was not an option either. Now, whether or not you think that this is to continue to buddy up to Trump to see if they could facilitate support for Russia, whether or not you think that this is MERS hoping that this will be a quick strike so the United States can quickly shift back over to Ukraine, whether or not this is MERS holding the fundamental position that Iran cannot get an atomic warhead because he believes that, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty should be upheld. Whatever reason or justification you put out there, Frederick MERS is saying he's not going to condemn it. Now, that doesn't mean that every other European is going to march in lockstep, but there's no consensus in Europe against this that's building. There's no big diplomatic protest against this that is building. And I don't believe the British or the Germans or Emmanuel Macron or any of these European powers, even the ones that want Iranian energy export, which is why a lot of them want to see a deal between the American government and the Iranians, and why a lot of them were so hyped about the JCPOA, the Iran deal under Barack Obama. Even despite that, we're not seeing that backlash from Europe. Here is what Trump has proposed after the Iranian retaliatory strikes on U.S. base in Doha, in Qatar. Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response. Always the man of diplomatic niceties, which we expected and have very effectively countered. There have been 14 missiles fired, 13 were knocked down, and one was set free because it was heading in a non-threatening direction. I am pleased to report that no Americans were harmed, and there will, hopefully, be no further hate. My goodness, turning into a Tumblr post. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, who made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Bahab's Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, in case you forgot who was talking. So, Trump wants to get off this train at this station. Trump probably got, in his case scenario, if this ends here, he got off pretty good. He was able to disable the Iranian nuclear program for at least a temporary period, and moving forward, whether or not they continue to build it back up, well, that's a problem for somebody 3 to 4 years from now. That's a problem for somebody down the line. That's not an immediate problem, and that gives them more time for sanctions to continue to do their work on the Iranians. That gives them more time to, build up their relationship with those in Gulf states, even though the Gulf states were also looking at some versions of maybe not normalization, but at least semi-unfreezing of relation with the Iranians. This gives Trump more time to maneuver, and the Iranians less wiggle room to race to a bomb. And it also leaves the Iranians in a state where, to be quite frank, they got their nose broken. Hezbollah got their teeth kicked in. They lost their proxy in Syria. The only Iranian proxy, and I'm going to use that term, a little openly here, but proxy, militia, ally, I've always had term with the term proxy. The only ones that don't look banged up are the ones in Iraq that are touch and go, whether they're going to assist Iranian operations, and the Houthis. So if they want to capture more civilian merchant vessels down the line, they will be able to do so. If they want to, harass the Saudis from the south, they will be able to do so. But going away from this, if this was to really end here in the way that Trump is designing, which from the post that I read, he was talking about a ceasefire in under 24 hours with multiple phases, and a ceasefire, the Iranians stop firing, then 12 hours and the Israelis stop firing, then 24 hours later, it's a full ceasefire. If this was to jump off here, the Iranians got their nose broken. They lost a lot of missile launchers. They lost a lot of air defense systems. Their proxies are quite weakened. They're not in a state to do much about Israel's ongoing war in Gaza. And any action they could take is from a weakened position where the Israelis could continue to escalate. And the American government, while they might not come back in or and support those operations there, I mean, it's not like the Israelis have any push from the Iranian side to necessarily stop their ongoing war in Gaza. So the Israelis, under this ceasefire, would not have to stop their war in Gaza. That gives Netanyahu a lot more flexibility, so he could have some decent reason to jump off here. Again, if he could convince the United States to stay on board for more bombing, doesn't seem like that's the case. Would it be beneficial for the Israelis to take out another third of Iran's long-range, launchers? Probably, but odds they're going to get that right now, unlikely. And again, there's always the possibility that another Iranian missiles can punch through and it hits another hospital, and it'll be a tragedy that grabs the headlines, and a lot of people could die. So, there are motivations to get them off at this station. And of course, as I said with the Iranians, I think that their returns are diminishing. So I think that they have a motivation to jump off now. And according to Trump, that's what they're doing. Congratulations to everyone. And this came right as we were going live. This came out right as we were going live. So as I was doing this segment, this came in. Congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed by Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran round down and completed their progress final missions for 12 hours, at which point the war will be considered ended. So what they're saying, that 6 hours from now, Iran and Israel are going to stop their firing of missiles. Their final missions are going to stop. And then at 12 hours after that, after this period has elapsed, then the war will be over. This air war between Israel and Iran will be done, and Trump will have facilitated in some manner the ceasefire. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire. And this is the interesting part to me, because it really, I think, shows to me the emphasis about who holds the cards right now when it comes to the balance of military might in this situation, and who would probably be on the receiving end of much of the damage if this continued. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the 12-day war will be saluted by the world. Isn't that bizarre? Iran starts the ceasefire, and for the next 12 hours, according to this, Israel can keep firing. Israel could keep firing at Iran. It could be 11 hours after Iran had stopped firing, and according to this, the Israelis could launch one big missile barrage targeting every air defense system that they have some marking of. They could attack every munition storage facility. They could attack even some infrastructure. It doesn't really matter. And then after that, boom, it'd be done. And Iran would just for that period have to stand there and take it. Then 12 hours after that, upon the 24th hour, end to the 12-day war. I think this shows very clearly who has the cards. And Trump is giving Israel more maneuverability to hit Iran on the way out. And he's ending it. If this is the case, and what Trump is announcing ends up getting publicly agreed to by the Iranians, and this holds, and the Iranians actually hold to it, because we saw from Trump's previous ceasefire announcements, from his civilian ceasefire announcement with the Russians, which the Russians publicly did not say that they agreed to and then violated, from the energy ceasefire agreement, which the Russians did say they agreed to, but then violated and has been holding kind of wobbly since then. Not all of Trump's ceasefire announcements actually end up with, a ceasefire. So whether or not the Iranians abide by these terms, or these are even the terms that the Iranians agreed to in public, or that they'll agree to them in public, we'll have to wait and see that. But if this is the case, this is definitely ending on the United States, Israel's, and Donald Trump's terms. For sure. During each ceasefire, the other side will remain peaceful and respectful. On the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will, he says, a lot of confidence. I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence. Big brain, everyone. What should be called the 12-day war. He's trying to coin it himself. He's writing himself into the documentaries right now. This is a war that could have gone on for years. And I mean, look. Okay, right now, this is actually going to look like a pretty good military and diplomatic coup by, I mean, maybe not diplomatic, since the diplomacy here was, kick their teeth in and then say, okay, come on. But I mean, this right now is looking like a pretty good military across the board victory for the United States and Israel. The fact that we disabled their nuclear atomic weapons program, at least for the time being. How much we've disabled it and for how long is still a question mark, but it's come with very little response. They've lost a lot of their launchers. They've lost a lot of their air defense system. This is looking pretty good, but also going on for years. I know the Iranians said that they could do this for 2 more years, but at what rate? At what rate could they do this for 2 years? They couldn't fire like 100 missiles a day, 100 missiles. They don't have a ton of hypersonic missiles. There's not like there's a endless supply here. So when they say for years, I mean, maybe if they both kept their rate of fire at an extremely low frequency, but I mean, that didn't seem like that was the way it was going. And destroyed the entire Middle East. Of course, Trump needs to make the stakes very high. I mean, if there was an atomic interaction, then it's not impossible that they could do a lot of damage, but of course, world-ending potential from Trump. But it didn't and never will. God bless Israel. God bless Iran. God bless the Middle East. God bless the United States of America. And God bless the world. God bless the world, he says. Now, we have yet to hear from the Iranians or the Israelis on whether or not this is true. Again, this happened right as we were going live. In fact, I am checking right now to see if there had been any update. As right now, Shaheeds are attacking across Ukraine, and I'm also watching the air alerts map to see what the situation is. Let's see. Is it in? It's in the Kiev region and in the Kharkiv region. Anyway, I would imagine that if this is true and this holds, the only person that I think is going to be angry about ending this right now, and when I say angry, I mean not wanting to, honestly, would probably be Bibi, if he thought he could topple the entirety of the Iranian regime and continue to escalate towards that, and doesn't just want to be known as a president who possibly delayed the program, but for sure ended it, because he knows that as long as the mullahs are in power, the ayatollahs in power, and they haven't completely dissuaded an atomic program with inspectors to make sure that is the case, whether there's a civilian program or not, that he cannot fully guarantee that. And considering that the Israelis said they were not willing to negotiate a civilian Iranian nuclear program, I think them knowing that the Iranians haven't completely thrown that off is something that's going to continue to eat away at the back of their mind. Whether or not that means in 2 years they're going to request, before Donald Trump leaves office, that they go in and strike again to buy them another 2 to 5 to 4 years or whatever, if they're not willing to negotiate, or whether Israel really wants to, the government of Netanyahu, of course, really wants to push towards full regime change. They're the only ones that I would think, those of that mindset, that would benefit from continuing to go through with this. Trump, I think, is very fearful of his base bucking from him. He knows that he was campaigning on the peace president, ending forever wars, and a military ground invasion of Iran would be the biggest FU that he could possibly muster up against those people. And the Iranians, considering their weakened position right now, probably have every motivation to disengage right now. Because it's hard to imagine that 12 months down the line, 3 months down the line, even 2 months down the line, them being in an honestly even an equivalent to now position, let alone anywhere near a better position. The question would be whether or not they would be able to stay where they are, let alone stop themselves from degrading further, which is what I think would probably happen. So if this is the case, even though this would be ending certainly on America and Israel's terms, Iran very well has many motivations to take this. Even if it's not ending on the best of terms, if they have to stand for 12-hour Israeli bombardment with no response. There was never ever going to be a ground invasion. Stop being stupid. Steve Palmer, let me be clear. I never believed there was going to be a ground invasion. I didn't say there was going to be a ground invasion. But people say there's going to be a ground invasion, including people with very large audiences. People like Tim Pool, who confidently said that the way that this is going to go is that Iran, due to a tweet he saw from Anthony Sabatini, the county commissioner of Lake County, Florida, no, of course, the top Iran expert in the region, he says Iran just voted to close the Hormuz Strait. And then he responds, gas prices about to skyrocket. U.S. will deploy to secure the strait. Iran will strike U.S. personnel and assets. U.S. will invade. Saying that we're going to put ground forces in Iran. So, people think that. People think this. It's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. And considering that we've seen oil prices go down after Iran's strike on the bases, I think, you know what this tells me? This tells me that they see Iran's strike on the bases in Doha, the largest American base in the Middle East over there in Qatar. They see it as, oh snap, that's their response. That's their retaliation. That's their way out of the situation without having to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to be something that could lead to a direct military attack on the ships doing this block on Hormuz, and could also lead to an increase in international energy prices that will not just affect America and her allies, which could lead to a negative response from Donald Trump, who has been particularly sensitive to energy price increases due to his campaign promises, but also from the Chinese, who I don't think would be particularly thrilled about this, or really anybody who wants to see energy prices low outside of maybe the Russians. Meaning that the only power that this would benefit is maybe Iran's, somewhat deterrence effect, showing that it's willing to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, unless it ends in horrible disaster, their ships blow up, and they're shown to not be able to actually do it without a determined military response, which from Trump, somebody so bullish and chest poundy, that's a possibility. So really, the power that would probably benefit the most is the power that has left them hanging, the Russians, by increasing energy in prices, which helps them continue to keep Gazprom afloat and continue to fund the war effort. And now, after these strikes on the American bases, oil prices fell. Can you believe that? After a bombing of an American military base in the Middle East, instead of prices going up due to the threat of conflict, due to the diplomatic implications of the fact that there were no American fatalities, no American service members were wounded as we know of right now, that the damage is reported to be minimal, and according to Donald Trump, there was forewarning indicating that the Iranians wanted to limit the potential blowback of this type of response, which you could call potentially a face-saving response, that the markets indicated there's no big risk for the Strait of Hormuz being blocked down right now, and the threat to that large shipping lane for large percentage of the world's energy trade. And so oil prices fell in tandem. And so the energy prices that we were seeing going into the 70s has shot back down into the high 60s, 68, 69 per barrel. Here we go. Oil prices tumbled $5 a barrel, over 6% on Monday after Iran attacked a U.S. military base in Qatar in retaliation to U.S. attacks on its nuclear facilities. Brent crude futures were down $4.9 or 6.3% at $72 a barrel at 2:13 p.m. and Texas Intermediate crude eased $4.6 or 6.2% to 69.23. So we're back down to the high 60s. Still, if you want to put more pressure on the Russian war economy, as some pro-Trump commentators who didn't want to show him to be a Moscow stooge have tried to show to me, hey, the oil price is coming down. Well, we're back up to the high 60s. You know, this isn't the Russians raking it in, but this also isn't the Russians in an immediate fiscal crisis, that's for sure. Also, we have an update. Israel is reporting that it has identified multiple missiles launched by Iran towards Israel, in that its defensive systems, David Sling and its different air defense systems, are being activated to intercept this threat. This is being reported by Jim from CNN, Jim Scudo. Let me read you the quote from the Israeli Defense Forces. A short while ago, sirens sounded in several areas across Israel following the identification of missiles launched from Iran towards the state of Israel. I just have to say, Trump's record for ceasefires this year is like 0 and 5. The energy ceasefire was violated. The civilian ceasefire he said the Russians agreed to didn't amount to much or anything, really, and the Russians didn't even publicly acknowledge that they agreed to it. The energy ceasefire that still remains in place is really, shaky, and there's a decent chance it's going to fall apart again. And the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are planning to strike their energy infrastructure in the near future. The 30-day ceasefire he demanded fell through. All other immediate demands for ceasefire fell through. The 24-hour, of course, but I mean, now I'm just going back for fun. And now the ceasefire following his strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, then followed by the missile attack on the American base in Doha, has fallen through. Because if the Iranians are striking Israel's military, civilian, anything, any of this would be a violation of the ceasefire offer. Because the ceasefire offer Trump made was, I want a 24-hour process where in the first 12 hours, Iran's under ceasefire. And then after that first 12 hours, Israel will enter ceasefire, which is extremely beneficial to Israel, extremely beneficial to the United States, because it ends the war on their terms after a pretty limp-wristed response to the strikes on their atomic facilities. And it allows Israel to continue to strike while tying Iran's hand for at least the first 12-hour period. Quite a strong ask. The Iranians seemingly have not delivered on that, now firing at the Israelis, not accepting the system. There was a statement from the foreign minister of Iran who said that maybe they would agree to some sort of ceasefire if it was unilateral both ways by 4 a.m., but that was 4 a.m. Tehran time, and that was about an hour or two ago. We do have Donald Trump responding to all of this after he said that a ceasefire had been achieved. By the way, he didn't say, let's have a ceasefire. Trump said, let's have peace. And then he said within 12 hours of that, hey, we have a ceasefire. Apparently we don't. Here's the statement from Donald Trump, an update on the situation. Israel and Iran came to me almost simultaneously and said, peace. I knew the time was now. The world and the Middle East are the real winners. Both nations will see tremendous love, peace, and prosperity in their futures. They have so much to gain and yet so much to lose if they stray from the road of righteousness and truth. The future for Israel and Iran is unlimited and filled with great promise. God bless you both. As Iran bombs Israel. Trump just got terrible pullout game. He needs to improve his ceasefire shuffle. Looks like Trump will be busting out the target list. I don't know. I mean, I could also see Trump being like, well, I guess I'll just let Israel and Iran go at it for a bit. And in a month or two, once I feel comfortable, I'll come back and threaten some stuff. He has a lot of maneuverability here because the Iranians are pretty fearful to having both not only a widespread Israeli air campaign against Iran, but America pooling their resources against them too, because they're having enough trouble with the Israelis, as we can all see. Iranian state media has announced a ceasefire has been imposed on the enemy after the country's military response to U.S. aggression, hours after Iran's retaliatory strikes against a U.S. base in Qatar. The SEF, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, successful missile operation in response to U.S. aggression and the exemplary steadfastness and unity of our dear people in defending our land, has imposed ceasefire on the enemy. An anchor with the state-run Iranian national news outlet said in a live broadcast. So it looks like they are signaling towards a ceasefire, but it seems like Trump's ceasefire that they said that they agreed to isn't something they agreed to. And the 4 a.m. deadline has been passed, and the strikes continue. And there was a direct strike on an apartment complex in Shiva by an Iranian missile, like within the last hour. So that indicates that the ceasefire timeline Trump put down was blown up by the Iranians. And, well, here's the footage to prove it.
Whoa.
But they probably still went off the train. The question is, can they give them a stop that they can get off on that saves enough face? Because I just don't see the benefit for Iran to drag this out really any longer. One last thing. Watch this, no matter how this ends, however the firing stop ends, if it ends in the next 24 hours because they now agree to a ceasefire and this mix-up at the end is forgotten or whatever, or it ends in a week or 2 weeks or who knows, I think this is going to be the spin going forward. Listen to this from J.D. Vance.
He talked about the next 6 hours,
right,
finalizing the attacks. I mean, I think what he's talking about is right now, for the American people watching, it's dark over there. That's typically when the Israelis and the Iranians have been shooting at each other. I think there's some recognition that that might continue for another few hours. And tomorrow really is a new day. The end of the 12-day war, the end of the Iranian nuclear program. And I really do believe the beginning of something very big for peace in the Middle East.
The end of the Iranian nuclear program. Is this the pitch? That it's over? That the Iranian nuclear program is gone? We blew up 3 facilities and now we don't have to worry about it anymore? The Iranians won't pursue an atomic weapon. They won't build new facilities. They won't do technology sharing with atomically armed states to try to advance the program. They won't recruit new scientists to replace the ones that were killed by the Israeli strikes. They won't continue to funnel resources into it. We've blown up these facilities. Now we don't need to come to the table and negotiate with the Iranians. We can just forget about it. And what if they point to the fact that the United States could strike those facilities, that the Israelis could place those drones across Iran from inside and do these strikes, that Israel could attack Iran with standoff munitions from like 100 miles away and take out their S-300s, take out their S-400s, while the Russians don't have the means to replenish them. What if they look at all this, these 30,000-pound bunker busters being dropped on Fordo, the Tomahawk missiles being thrown at Isfahan, and the conclusion they come to is, we didn't make an agreement with the United States. We have made the agreements with the United States in the past, like the JCPOA, like the Iran deal with the Obama administration. That was torn up. And then after they tore it up, they blew up our program. Even if we were willing to accept civilian enrichment, this administration wasn't willing to do that. If anything, they might look at all of this, the bombing with the Tomahawks, the 30,000-pound bombs, the extended Israeli air campaign, the destruction of their S-300s and their S-400s, the placing of drones and munitions inside Iran in advance to launch and strike once this operation was underway. They might look at all this and say, these are all justifications for our program. These are all why we had a nuclear program to begin with. The only way to guarantee that the Iranians don't have a program anymore and they will no longer be above 3% civilian enrichment, as nuclear non-proliferation treaties dictate, is to have monitors on the ground that have been agreed to be there, or to continuously bomb every few years Iran and risk a confrontation where our troops stationed in Jordan, stationed in Iraq, stationed in Doha could be killed. And even then, that still doesn't mean they could stop pursuing the program, even if this all happened again in 3 to 4 years. As Trump's about to leave the White House, he goes through again for good measure, blows it up again, passes it over to the next administration, be it President Gavin Newsom, President J.D. Vance, President Buttigieg, President AOC, President Marco Rubio, President DeSantis, be whoever it is. Is this the state of affairs we're going to be in? Just continuous bombing runs on the Iranians? Unless you want to put troops on the ground to manually enforce nuclear nonproliferation, you have to get the Iranians to agree to monitoring and agree to inspections, which has to be an agreement between Washington and Tehran. That's an agreement. That's something you negotiate. That's a deal. That's why Trump should have said after the strikes, let's come and negotiate, not just declare peace, declare peace, declare ceasefire, declare ceasefire. Oh, the ceasefire didn't come about. It didn't come around. That's rough. That's rough. Anyway, peace, peace, peace. They should have brought them to the table to negotiate, made the terms clear, made what the future of American, Iranian-Israeli relations could be, and then offer the alternative if they limited to civilian enrichment with monitoring. And that's not what we got. That's not what we got at all. And until we have that, the threat of a nuclear Iran has not just dissipated. At most, it's been delayed. Ironically, a ceasefire agreement would enable Iran to get a nuke. Currently, Israel is still bombing Fordow to prevent construction crews from returning. A ceasefire, I don't know if it would allow them to get a nuke, but I mean, it would allow them to start the rebuilding process. Point is, as long as there's not like an enshrined agreement, some structure here, I just don't find it likely that this is the end of the threat. I mean, even if the Iranians were just to hold it over people's head for the diplomatic leverage of, you need to give me something for this, sanctions relief or otherwise, I find it unlikely. Pay attention to your chat. Put it on screen, please. Oh my God. Okay, sorry, it's not on screen. You give up, Danable? Then give up. Give up. I read it out loud. What do you guys need a fucking picture book? You guys need a picture book? So this right here represents the missile. Nah, I'm not doing that. Come on.